Greetings, Matt from Hidden Machine here again. I play a lot of games for the channel and also on my own as a video game enthusiast, and in 2022 I played over 100 games. And I know this because at the start of the year I decided to make a detailed log of everything I was playing, when I started it, when I beat it, how long it took me to finish. And that sort of detailed record keeping lasted for maybe 9 weeks before I gave up on doing it, mostly because I forgot all about it. However, I was able to fill in the gaps in my record keeping thanks to this channel, and also looking at my purchase history and play history on Steam and GOG and the Ubisoft launcher and the
Ubisoft
Rockstar Games launcher and the Epic Games launcher, and I was able to figure it all out over time. So, with over 100 games under my belt for this year, were any of them any good? Well, yeah, a lot of them were really good, and I'd like to suggest those games to anyone who's looking for a new game to check out, and also got a lot of games that I played this year that weren't very good at all. This by no means is supposed to be a comprehensive review of every game that I played, but I am going to talk briefly about each title, and we've got a lot to get through, so I decided the best way to handle it would be to break things up into different categories, and the first category for me is going to be games that I had previously played at some point in my life and revisited and replayed in 2022. It's been a long time goal of this channel to do a programming block called 30 Days of Duke, where we do 30 different Duke Nukem related videos, one for every day of the month. And over the last year or so, we've made, I think, 4 or 5 Duke Nukem videos in total, so we're not quite there yet. But slowly we are picking away at this project, and I do think we'll see it happen at some point in 2023. That said, in preparation for 30 Days of Duke, I played through Duke Nukem 1, Duke Nukem 2, and Duke Nukem 3D. Now, I didn't complete these games, but I played through a good portion of them, and I have completed the games in the past, although for Duke 1 and 2, I did have to use a bunch of cheat codes because those games get absurdly difficult. For a game that's over 30 years old now, I think the first Duke Nukem title holds up surprisingly well, and if you want to ever give it a shot through legitimate means, you can pick it up on Zoom Platform. This is a site that's somewhat similar to something like GOG, wherein they make old games available on modern hardware. And everything on Zoom Platform is DRM free, which means when you purchase Postal 3 through Zoom Platform, you won't experience any of those DRM issues that caused it to be delisted from Steam. If you wanted to buy Postal 3 for any reason. I also wound up playing through another classic trilogy of games, Max Payne 1, 2, and 3. I replayed these games for our Yeah, I've Played series. It's a show where myself and Jordan and Andrew on the channel all play the same game, and then we have a big deep dive analysis and discussion of it. Earlier this year, we got the announcement that Rockstar and Remedy are working together to remake Max Payne 1 and 2 on the Northlight engine, and there was a pretty interesting Max Payne Easter egg in Crossfire X that seems to strongly suggest Max Payne is going to be officially absorbed into the Remedy connected universe. Now, that's my own fan speculation, but there's something there, and the fact that they're even acknowledging Max Payne in a Remedy game and saying it's all connected, either they're toying with us or they're letting us know, yeah, it's all coming together. Either way, these games also hold up really well, especially Max Payne 1 with the HD texture mods you can get. This game looks just incredible, and they all play really great. There's a bit of frustration in some of the platforming parts in the first game, in the nightmare scenarios, but other than that, I think these are solid 10 out of 10 games, and I think if you haven't played the Max Payne series, pick it up. It's often on sale for maybe $10 to $12, so give it a shot. Some other games that I revisited this year for the Yeah, I've Played series were Quantum Break, Spec Ops: The Line, and Resident Evil 4. I've got a lot to say about each of those games, but I've already said it all in our Yeah, I've Played episodes, so if you want to know more, check those out. Lastly, in terms of games that I was replaying in 2022, I just started another playthrough of Doom 3. I'm doing it with the Doom 3 source port, and it feels pretty good, but I've started this game 4 or 5 times since it first came out, and I always find myself getting bored with it, but this time I'm going to see it through. I think the game has a lot of fans and apologists, and I know it's a kind of flawed, almost like black sheep member of the Doom family, but there are a lot of people who have a lot of good things to say about it, and even though the game's never clicked with me, I also don't think I've ever given it a fair chance. I've gotten past the first sort of long introductory mission, and then as soon as the game was really picking up, I'd get bored and bail out. So we'll see. I will probably finish it in the next few weeks and make a video on my experience, but giving Doom 3 a shot. One real shot this time. Maybe. We'll see if I get bored and quit it again. Next up, I want to talk about some early access games that I played that, at the time of making this video, are still in early access. Anomalous is a pretty promising looking first-person shooter that's been getting a fair number of updates since I first covered it earlier this year. This game is being worked on by a solo dev, and I think it has a lot of really promising ideas in it. It's only $5 right now, and most of the reviews on Steam are pretty positive, so if you're interested in checking out indie shooters, I think this one's worth a spin. INCISION is another early access FPS game that I played earlier this year, and it's been getting some more updates, and it's pretty brutal. I think this game is really cool. It has great level design, great enemy design, great weapons, but it is very hard. It's super unforgiving, and I really only was able to make progress in it after using some cheats. So take it for what it is. It's a really hard game. I'm not super hardcore in the FPS genre, but I still really enjoy navigating the levels and solving the puzzles and seeing all the cool stuff. There's lots of great set pieces. This game is really, really worth checking out, especially if you like more brutal first-person shooters in terms of gore and intensity and overall difficulty. On the complete other side of the spectrum, Lens Island is a early access survival game that is pretty easygoing in its delivery and its overall mood and look. There's some interesting stuff to be found deeper in these caves, and there's enemies and combat and some secrets, but overall it's a very gentle, pleasant experience, and the game's been getting a lot of updates, and I think that if you like the survival genre, this game could be for you. It's gotten a lot of positive reviews, and I really enjoyed my time with it, and I'm not really a huge fan of that sort of game, so if that says anything, I don't know, give it a shot. One more early access game I want to talk about that is still in early access is Ex-Zodiac. This game obviously takes inspiration from the Star Fox series, but there's a few nods to other games as well, and even though it's essentially a Star Fox clone in many ways, it's really, really good. I played a lot of Star Fox 64, it's one of my favorite games of all time. I don't love the original Star Fox, I have a harder time with the lack of mobility there, but this game does a lot to kind of bridge the gap between those two titles. It has features from each, and it has a sort of low poly SNES look that you can turn off if you don't like those textures. It has an HD version, but overall, this game is really, really, really promising. Still in early access, there's more levels and things to be revealed later on, but get in now, you won't regret it if you like Star Fox. It is so good. I love this game. I played a lot of demos in 2022. Some are games that have since been released, and some are games that are not yet released. In terms of games that were released, well, I checked out demos for Fashion Police Squad, which is a pretty fun throwback shooter that reminds me of something like Blake Stone, but with a lot of humor and some more innovative gameplay, especially in the platforming sections. It's a little simplistic, it's not super hardcore or anything, but it's a lot of fun, and I think the game is really funny. Kaiju Wars is a tactics game that has a really sleek presentation. It has a lot of really fun little Easter eggs and quirks to it that I think would make a really fun experience for someone who's super into the kaiju movies or into this sort of genre of game. For me, I enjoyed the demo, but I'm not super into the tactics stuff, so I'm not the best person to speak on it, but I gotta say, this game has a lot of style, and I really enjoyed playing through the demo. Not sure if I enjoyed it enough to pick up the full game, but it is out there. Metal Hellsinger is a game that got a lot of hype. I played through the demo, and honestly, I was underwhelmed. It seemed like it was very derivative of Doom and Doom Eternal in terms of the presentation, and in terms of the gameplay, I'm not totally pulled in by the rhythm-based shooting. I know a lot of people are, and that's cool if you're into that, and if you like this kind of metal stuff, it might be exciting to hear singers that you enjoy performing these songs. Personally, I'm not so into these genres of metal or these bands. The game's not really for me, but it did get a lot of hype, and the demo was fun, but it didn't sell me on the game. Moonscars is a Souls-like 2D action platformer. The demo was very cryptic, very hard to decipher, pretty difficult, but challenging in a way that didn't feel insurmountable, which I think is a way to describe a lot of the Souls-like games, especially the 2D ones. For some reason, I find them a little more manageable than the 3D ones. I don't know why, maybe it's just because I'm used to playing older games, but Moonscars is really, really cool. It's got a great visual style that kind of reminds me of like a really like wet oil painting or something, and the story is very interesting, and there's a lot of gameplay mechanics in it that are probably derivative of other games in the Souls kind of genre that I'm maybe not familiar with, but for me, coming into it as a casual fan of that kind of stuff, I had a great time, and while I haven't picked up the full version yet, I do intend to play it in 2023. Gloomwood is a tribute to games like Thief, and it's in the first-person genre. It's a stealth action game, a little more forgiving than something like later levels of Thief, in my experience at least. But it's a lot of fun. The game has great style. It's a New Blood title, I believe. And overall, this demo was really, really engaging. And again, I haven't picked up the full game yet, but it's in early access now, and it's been getting great reviews. So if you are a fan of the stealth genre, especially games like Thief, I think you should definitely check this one out. And honestly, if you're super into those games, you probably already have. At the time of making this video, Signalis just dropped a couple weeks ago, and I have yet to play the full version of the game, but I was blown away by the demo. It's definitely in the mold of the PlayStation 1 Resident Evil Silent Hill games, but it's also got this sort of like anime Metal Gear Solid vibe to the presentation. Now, I've only played the demo, which is kind of like the first mission of the game, although I'd imagine it's maybe remixed or abbreviated in some way for the sake of the demo. I will say, you might want to be more familiar with the older survival horror genre to really get into it. I could see it maybe being a turnoff for people who aren't used to the tank controls and that sort of combat. It's got a very particular kind of pacing, but if you're a fan of that old school stuff, this is a really good continuation of that style with a lot of unique twists thrown in. Now, as I said, a lot of the demos I played were for games that are not out yet, at least not at the time of making this video. Those would include games like Fallen Aces, which is a noir-themed immersive sim. The demo is super promising. I believe this is another New Blood game. I've got my eye on this one. I've been watching the development for a long time now, and it is really, really promising. I really can't wait to see more of this. I don't know if they're going to drop another demo, or if we're just going to eventually see, the release date come up, but as of right now, I'd say play the demo if you can get it. It is really, really cool, especially if you're into the whole immersive sim thing, but it's got a really nice comic book inspired presentation. Overall, super stylish, super fun, very innovative gameplay in terms of like mixing the comic booky kind of 2D old school FPS boomer shooter thing with the immersive sim, which, I mean, that's kind of where that genre is kind of rooted in anyway in a lot of ways, but it doesn't really feel like anything else. It feels new, even though it's taking from a lot of old games. Does that make sense? Another demo I played is a sort of prologue for a game called Rendevouz, where the prologue mission is called Rendevouz: Shadows of the Past. This is a sort of action-adventure game with combat and movement in the theme of Prince of Persia and things like flashback. I thought this was pretty promising. There were a few sort of wonky things in the demo for me, but I still really enjoyed my time with it, and I don't think this game has a release date or anything, but I know they are moving toward the full release of the game. I would say if you can get your hands on the demo, if you enjoyed things like Flashback or the old Prince of Persia games, I mean the 2D ones, the old games, you might enjoy this. It's got really fun animation, it's got this cyberpunk world. I got my eye on this one. I'm not entirely sold on it just yet, but there's some promising stuff here. Mr. Sleepy Man is a N64 style collectathon 3D action platformer starring Mr. Sleepy Man. I think this game is legitimately hilarious, and at least going off the demo. I believe this is another solo dev game. I've been following the development on Twitter. This game is really, really cool. It's a little clunky at points, at least in my experience. I found some of it to be kind of difficult to decipher or difficult to control at times, but that's also not really something that I didn't kind of expect from those old N64 collectathon type platformer 3D runaround games. Sometimes they're a little obtuse. It's not supposed to be a slam against this game. I just found some of it to be a little shaky, but again, this is a demo of an in-development game, and overall, my impression is, wow, I cannot wait for this one to come out. A lot of cool ideas. I really like the humor, the presentation. The whole thing is very exciting, so check this one out if you like the old N64 collectathons. Things like the Banjo-Kazooie games or Super Mario 64. I think this one's worth at least playing the demo. Selaco is a first-person shooter that's kind of taking cues from games like Fear. I haven't played enough of Fear to know how it really translates, but it has very fast-paced combat, very mobile combat. The enemy combatants that you're facing are pretty smart. They have a lot of mobility themselves. They work together. This demo is really, really strong, and I think that if you are a fan of the FPS genre, especially more old school stuff, and I hesitate to use the term boomer shooter because I feel like a lot of that is stuff like Dusk, things that feel more like Doom clones in a way, or maybe something more akin to like 93 to 95, 96 in terms of first person shooters. This is definitely more aimed toward the early 2000s in terms of its reference points, in my opinion. I don't want to speak for the devs, but it definitely plays like a generation up from a lot of the, boomer shooters that I've seen that are definitely taking more from Doom and the early days of first-person shooters. Angerfoot is a game that still is not released yet, but has a ton of different demos that have been released over the last couple years. We've covered some on the channel. It's been really exciting to see this game grow and develop and change over time. It's basically a first-person shooter of sorts, although there's a big emphasis on the foot. It's the anger foot. You kick. Everything is one-hit deaths, one-hit kills for the most part. It's really stylish. It's really fast-paced. Kind of taking some cues from something like Hotline Miami, but in a first-person mode. Really fun, really funny, stylish game. And the levels are very short, sort of, action, the athletic course kind of stuff, I think this game is going to do really well when it finally gets released. But as of right now, if you can, check out the demo. It's super fun, and you can get through it pretty quickly. They're pretty short levels. So there's a significant amount of content in the demo. I think you get, I'm pulling this out of my ass, maybe 10 levels, including a boss fight. Each one is unique, and they're very fun to replay because of how fast they are. It's not randomized. There's no roguelite stuff here. You know, it's a course where every time you go through, it's the same course, but you can learn how to maximize your environment and your weapons and the enemy placement to get these really fast runs. And I think the speed running is kind of like one of the biggest kind of points of interest in the game. Check this one out. I haven't really played anything like this before. Again, it's got shades of games I've played, but in terms of this style of execution, it's really, really, really unique. I think this game really stands on its own, and I really have been pumped on every version of the demo, even though some of the earlier ones were like way different than the current version. The game's really grown and changed a lot, and in my opinion, it's been a vast improvement every time. Nine Souls is an action platformer. It had a very, very fun demo, pretty intense, kind of parry-based, not quite Souls-like in terms of the parrying and how intense the combat is, but definitely taking some cues from that genre. I really, really, really liked this demo. It had a really sweet style. I love the graphics. I love the speed of the gameplay. Demo was really short, and it just made me want to play the game. Still not sure when this one is coming out, but keep an eye on it. I think this one is really, really cool. Hellscreen is one of the most confusing games I've ever played, and it took a long time to even sort of get a grip on it. Essentially, you have a rear view mirror that comes up over you, and you can shoot in reverse, you can shoot forward. Some things you can only see in reverse. Some enemies are only going to take damage certain ways. Visually, this game is either stunning or a total mess, depending on your opinion of it. I think it looks really cool, and it takes a while to get adjusted to, but once you're in the rhythm, it's really engaging. It's I don't want to speak for anyone else, but I could see this game having kind of like a, you know, this barrier to entry where it's got this kind of really obtuse, you know, very unique mechanics of the, you know, the visor and the backward forward kind of thing. And then also the visual style. I know I've watched a couple of people stream this game. I've seen some quick reviews. It's very divisive, but if you give it a shot, I think it could be worth your time. I don't know when this game's coming out, but the demo was a lot of fun, and I've never really seen anything like it before. Supplice is a straight-up classic FPS game. It's made by people who are kind of deeply involved, super deeply involved in the Doom modding community. This game rips. It's brutal, it's old school, it's got a great look, great music, everything is punchy and effective. It's basically an old school FPS in the style of like a Doom 2 or something, but man, the demo is meaty. 2 real big levels that could take you an hour each easily if you're looking around for secrets. I got my eye on this one. It is really, really sweet. Retchid is another first-person shooter demo that I played earlier this year. Surprise, surprise, you're on a space station and a bunch of demons and shit are wreaking havoc. Nothing new. Definitely been tread a million times by other games, but I don't know, this game has a very promising style, and the level design and everything was really on point for me. Now, this demo's been delisted from Steam. I do have a review of it in another video. You could see a bit more of it. The devs have said that the demo is no longer representative of the quality of the game. And my biggest issues with the demo were kind of just some loose things where the presentation just didn't feel very polished. You know, some of the character animations were a little raw, things like that. But really great world building. You know, there's definitely some influences from games like Dead Space, Doom, stuff like that, but I don't know, it's hard to say. It's hard to really advocate for this game if you can't play the demo, but hopefully work continues and there's a new demo or a release date on the horizon, because sometimes these games, especially indie games, you know, they're not necessarily breaking new ground, but they can take an old, well-worn idea and put a new twist on it that makes it just as exciting as if it were a, you know, totally new idea. It's fun to see someone taking things that we've seen so many times in other games, like the doomed space station, and make it something that's worth your time. It's a pretty incredible feat in some ways, and I saw other people online talking about this demo when it came out, feeling similarly, where it's like, yeah, it's not extremely unique, it's a little janky, but it's got this really strong sense of style and a strong spirit to the game. So I'm really hoping to see more from this one before too long. Peripeteia, and I think I'm saying that right, is a stealth action RPG that is both first and third person. I've never really played anything quite like it. It's got hints of some PS1, PS2 era type games, but it's also got this real unique immersive sim kind of thing going on where the world feels very alive and huge, even when the levels aren't necessarily that big. They feel enormous. There's this depth and this sense of like ominous secrets in the shadows. And one of the cool things about the game is that you can scale any surface basically, and get to these vantage points that might seem impossible in many other games. I have a hard time really fully describing this one, but I'd really recommend checking out the demo. It's planned for a 2023 release at some point, but man, I mean, this game is on another level in terms of what it's trying to do. It's really cool. I wish I could say more. I'm realizing the more I talk about it, the less I'm actually saying anything worthwhile about it. So just check it out. COVEN is a game that has had several demos out over the last while. I think the most recent one was a Halloween demo that had some recent updates, if I'm remembering correctly. It's a old school FPS type game wherein your character can use magic, and it's really, really, really brutal. You eat enemies for health, you can lop heads off, you can shoot fire and cast spells, and there's degradation to the weapons. There's like a bit of a survival thing going on. It's a pretty hardcore game in a lot of ways. I had a lot of difficulty with the demo, like getting through it all, but it was a super satisfying experience, and I'm really pumped to see where this one goes because the creativity on display here is super exciting. It's one of those FPS games where one of the things that keeps you going is just seeing what the next area is going to be and what enemies and, set pieces it'll contain. This one's really cool. Slayer's X Terminal Aftermath Vengeance of the Slayer is another FPS demo. This is supposed to be a sort of like, it's not a joke game, but the premise is a joke in some ways. Basically, so-and-so had this idea for the best game ever. It's a very like junior high sort of like, high school notebook, sketching out your characters in your notebook and being like, the ultimate Slayer guy, and they make this awesome game, and the game is super funny. It's rare that I find games that I think are legitimately funny, but I did find a few last year, and this is one of them. So it's in the mold of a lot of old school shooters, but it's got this real unique presentation where I could see it being divisive if you're not into this sort of humor, but I am. It's very dumb humor. It's very over the top. It's very, very goofy. But I had a lot of fun with this demo, and I thought the demo was way too short. It really just made me want more of the game, but I'm really stoked on this one. And again, if you like the humor, I think you'll really have fun with this because it's well made, feels good to play, combat feels good, level design, searching for secrets. It's all got the hallmarks of a old school FPS, but I think it's really funny and it's got a very unique style. Another first-person game I want to talk about is Apocalyptic Vibes. This game has not yet been released. I think it actually got delayed. I feel like it was supposed to be released in December of this year. I could be wrong about that. This is a super hardcore, super bleak, survival-based FPS where you're there in the apocalypse and you're just kind of going through this very, very desolate wasteland. It is hardcore. This game is very bleak. It is very lonely, and anyone that you find is likely there to murder you because they're just trying to get by as well. They're going to take your resources. It's very cutthroat. It's the kind of game where every action you make, whether you're entering a new area or firing your gun or, opening a cabinet or looking around and scoping out enemies, It all feels super like weighty and important because you're trying to balance this survival, and it feels so brutal and so unforgiving. The game has a really great atmosphere that I think is super powerful, and if you're into the sort of lone apocalyptic survival kind of stuff, I think you'll really have a good time with this one. Again, it's pretty brutal. It's a little undercooked right now. You know, that's why the game is still in development. I did run into a couple small bugs, but they didn't detract me from continuing to play through the demo. Last demo I want to cover for a game that is still yet to be released is BioCrisis 2 Return to the Lab. Now, the first BioCrisis game was released, I think, sometime in 2021, and it's a light gun shooter. It's a corridor shooter. You're in a corridor, literally, and you're trying to get to the end of the corridor. You fire enemies. You can play it with a light gun. You can play it with a mouse. I played it with a Sinden light gun and had a blast with it. And it's a, you know, I think the game is under $5. It's really quick and to the point. It's a sort of very brief arcade experience. The sequel, on the other hand, is expanding that whole idea and doing a tribute to games like House of the Dead, and it's really, really sweet. The demo is so much fun. It's a classic light gun game, you know, Maximum Force, Area 51, all that kind of stuff. If you enjoyed those old light gun games, I played this game with a light gun, this demo. I also played it with keyboard and mouse. It feels good both ways. Obviously, the light gun is the superior experience in terms of, you know, I mean, it's a light gun. How do you beat a light gun? Normally, when I start a game, my intention is to play through until the end, and sometimes I push through and finish a game even if I hate it. I don't really know why. Maybe I hate myself, but every now and then I start a game that I can't finish for whatever reason, or I go, I want to finish this, just not right now. There were a lot of games like that for me this year. Some were games that I said, I really just don't have the time to dedicate myself to this, and I want to be able to fully immerse myself in it when I have a bit more free time. And some of these were games where my graphics card just wasn't really up to the challenge. And I do plan on upgrading my PC next year, so I put a few of these games on hold because when I saw how they were running on my 1050, I couldn't really feel good about playing them, and some of them I just straight up couldn't play. So those games, in no particular order, were Octopath Traveler, a really cool looking RPG that I just didn't have the time to fully devote myself to, but I intend to get through it. I really love a good old school turn-based RPG. Unforeseen Incidents is a game that I started and I really wasn't fully grabbed by the story. I don't know if I'm gonna finish this one or not. I love the presentation, I love the visuals from the trailer, but once I actually got into the game, it felt a little unfinished and kind of rough around the edges in a way that made it hard for me to be super excited about getting all the way through it. I got just about halfway through the game and haven't gone back since. TUNIC is a game that I was watching for years and years, and when I finally got the chance to play it, I said, wow, this rules. And I got maybe 4 or 5 hours in and got busy with other stuff and just have not picked it up since. I have no excuse. It's a great looking game, really fun. I know when I get to it, it's gonna be great. Postal 4 is a game that I've covered here on the channel a couple times, one of the early janky alpha builds as well as the official release. I did a quick video talking about this, essentially running with scissors, ran out of money. They needed money for the game, so they released it even though they knew it wasn't totally finished. And the game's been getting steady updates and they've been working to improve it, but at the time that I last played it, I just didn't like the state it was in, and I figured, man, I waited this long, I'm gonna wait for a few more updates, and once I feel like, alright, they put in enough work, I'm ready to play it, then I'll play it. But as of right now, I shouldn't even say right now. As of my last time playing it, a few months back, it just wasn't there for me. And I love Postal 2, but even that took, 11 years to be fully completed in some ways. with the DLCs and everything. Anyway, Postal 4, looking forward to it. Just not there yet. I was so stoked when Judgment finally hit the PC, and I got about an hour into it and realized, man, I am gonna do nothing but play this for a long time once I really get going. That time is not now. I was moving right when it came out, and I haven't had the chance to pick it back up yet. But man, I'm so glad the Judgment series finally made it to PC. There were some weird legal issues with one of the main actors in the game had a contract with his talent agency where they forbade his image from appearing online, and since the PC is connected to the internet, he couldn't be on the computer, but they were allowing his image to be on the PlayStation, even though PlayStations are basically not that different from computers in terms of how people use them to play games, consume media, whatever. The nuances were somehow worked out. Now we can play these games on PC, and I can't wait to get into it because, man, I wanted to play these games for so long. It rules so far. And I love all the other games from that studio, for the most part. I'll talk about Binary Domain a little later, but really pumped. Just haven't had the time to really dedicate myself to Judgment yet. Deadly Premonition 2 is a game that I have started twice now, and it is really asking a lot of the player. There are some really, really long scenes. It is paced in a very peculiar way, and I know these are very quirky, oddball games, the Deadly Premonition series. I know they're very divisive. I do think it is right up my alley. I love the humor, I love the writing and presentation, and I love the complexity of everything I've experienced so far. But again, it's one of those games that I'm going to need to actually dedicate myself to. I can't casually jump in and out of it because there's so much going on, it's impossible to keep track of. Valfaris is a pretty difficult side-scrolling shooter action game, kind of in the mold of like Contra or the Turrican games. Man, this game rules. It's kind of checkpoint based, so you complete a small area, get to a checkpoint, small area, get to a checkpoint. I've been playing this game in chunks, and I've gotten a little more than halfway through and just haven't finished it for, again, no good reason. It just kind of kept falling down the list of priorities, although I really do want to play this one in preparation for the sequel that's coming up, which is looking so cool. Cannot wait to get into that one as well. Dismantled, the director's cut, is a super fucked up and brutal FPS survival horror game. I believe it's a solo dev game. This game is dark and it's hard, and I played through a good portion of it on stream and then played a bit more by myself. Honestly, the game stresses me out, and I have not been in a place where I feel like getting stressed out to finish it. But man, this game is something else. Oof. I had to play it in the censored mode for the stream because there's a lot of nudity and some very graphic violence. And it's all done in like a, old school kind of Doom engine type graphics, but man, this game is brutal. Rough game. Not rough, like it's not poorly made. It's a very demanding experience in terms of the horror and the bleakness of it all. But maybe you're super into that. So if you are, man, check this game out. It's crazy. And there's, again, a sequel in development that looks really, really cool. V Rising is a survival-based MMO game where you play as a vampire and you go out, you gather resources, you hunt other vampires and monsters, and maybe you're not hunting other vampires, I could be wrong about that part, but you're hunting monsters and you kind of absorb their powers and you get more powerful and you build yourself up. It's really cool. I played it on stream a couple times, I played it by myself a bit. I would enjoy it more if I had friends that played it, and I haven't been able to convince anyone else to get it yet. So I put this one on hold. I would like to revisit it. I think it's really fun. I'm not super into the survival genre, but this one did it for me, and I'd like to play more of it, but I need to play with people I know. Police, Shootout, and Lemuria are two games that Andrew and I played on stream. They are both indie games that are kind of janky. kind of feel like asset flip games a lot of the time, but have some really unique mechanics and story and are pretty weird and pretty brutal in their content. Lemuria in particular had a lot of extreme graphic violence and full frontal nudity that we couldn't show on stream, but this game is absurd. It's very janky. I wouldn't say it's broken, but it doesn't feel wonderful to play, but it is absurd, and I do want to finish it just to see the other absurd scenarios I'll get into. Same thing with Police Shootout, which is kind of like a shooting game, but also a detective game, and you gotta kind of try to, not escalate a situation. So you need to arrive at the scene, gather intelligence, and then kind of, confront the suspect or whoever and try to get through the whole situation unscathed. It sounds like it's a game where you play as a cop that just kills people. Maybe calling it Police Shootout is a little divisive, or a little intentionally divisive, I should say. But pretty interesting game. We really were surprised at how much fun we were having with figuring everything out and seeing the scenarios, but again, I just put it down, didn't pick it back up. Maybe if these games were a little less janky, I'd be more motivated to hop right back in, but I don't know. You can check out our streams, they're in the archive. Weird West is a game from Wolf-Eye Studios. It's an immersive sim. Wolf-Eye was founded by one of the co-founders, I believe, of Arcane. This guy worked on Arx Fatalis, Prey, and the Dishonored series. I'm forgetting his name off the top of my head, and I don't think I could pronounce it correctly anyway, but he definitely knows what he's doing in terms of game design. This is a really amazing game, and I had a blast starting it, and again, it was just kind of a bit much for me to commit to at the time, but I can't wait to get back into this one. Man, cannot say enough how cool it is, and I believe there's a really sizable free demo, so if you're not entirely sold on the concept, or if you're not familiar with the immersive sim genre, I would say check out that free demo, because man, what a game. I'm realizing right now that I forgot to mention Heavy Rain is another game that I played last year and replayed again in 2022 for the Yeah I've Played series, and going through it really made me want to play the rest of the Quantic Dream games. And I started Fahrenheit, or the Indigo Prophecy, depending on where you're from, it had different titles. Not a great game, but very interesting to see the early iterations of what would become, Detroit, Become Human, and Heavy Rain, and all those other games, the sort of cinematic experience games, not fully realized there in Indigo Prophecy or Fahrenheit, but interesting. I haven't finished it yet. I'm working on a very long form essay video on it right now. Haven't completed it. Kind of shelved it for now, but it is coming along. Another game that I started from Quantic Dream was Beyond Two Souls, and I started it and said, holy shit, this is too bananas. I cannot play this by myself. I need to wait and do a Yeah I've Played episode on it with Andrew and Jordan, because it is one of the most absurd things I've ever played, and I think we'll have a lot of fun discussing that absurdity. So again, put that one on the shelf too. For maybe the 10th time in my life, this year in 2022, I tried to complete Duke Nukem Forever. Man, that game sucks. Couldn't finish it. Put it down. Maybe I'll beat it one day. Man, hate that game. Elisa, I think is how you pronounce it, is a throwback to the first generation PS1 survival horror games. Amazing presentation. I started this one and found that it was a bit too hardcore for me. I'm really not used to that sort of unforgiving style of survival horror. I did play through the remake of Resident Evil, the HD PC port, and I played through Silent Hill 1 earlier this year, and I'll talk about both those a bit more later, but I'm not super well versed in that old school genre, and I did play Silent Hill on easier difficulty levels. I think I played it on easy. I started it on normal. I definitely could not play through it on hard. And Elisa feels like a hard mode, to me at least. Maybe I just didn't get in touch with the combat and pacing of the game correctly, but it was kicking my ass, and I put it down kind of shamefully, and I'd like to revisit it, but I need better strategy. Now, I mentioned that some games were too much for my graphics card. One would be the Resident Evil Winters expansion. I wanted to play the DLC story with Rose, and man, I could not get it to run very well, or not, I could get it to run sorta, and it looked like shit, and when it didn't look like shit, it would not run at all for me. I gotta upgrade my card because it was really difficult to get through with the way it was handling. The other game that I couldn't play at all was Deathloop. I just couldn't run it. I didn't have enough VRAM, I didn't realize. Missed my window of opportunity to refund it. That was a bummer. And lastly, Ghostwire Tokyo. I tried playing it on the lower settings, and it was still really chugging. So there's a couple games that I'd like to pick up right now, like Callisto Protocol, which is coming out probably right around the time I launch this video. I'm gonna have to wait till I get a new PC. There's no way I can handle these games with a 1050. I think they require a 1060 or 1080 as a minimum. And yeah, my PC is just not up to the task. So, damn, I'm missing out. Now, most of the games I've been talking about have been on PC. I play a bit on Xbox One X and a bit on PS4, but mostly I'm playing stuff on my PC. On my PS4, I played through Spider-Man. It was good. Kind of underwhelming. I think it lasted a bit too long, and all of the missions where you had to be Miles or Mary Jane and kind of go through the stealth stuff, it just felt like artificially lengthening the game in a way. And it also felt like the game hit several climaxes in terms of the story and the tension, and then it just kept going. And it was hard for me to maintain a vested interest the entire time. That said, it was still really good. It's good. It's a solid 9 for me. I don't think I could ever replay it though. Aside from the PS4, I also play games on mobile and VR, and so in terms of mobile, played a lot of Slay the Spire. I think it's one of the best games I've ever played. It's super addictive, super fun. It's got everything I want from a roguelite. Quick, easy to pick up for a round or two, put it down. Sometimes that round turns into 45-50 minutes. Sometimes it's 5 minutes. But great game. And you can shut it off, walk away, pick it up right where you left off. Love that. Also on mobile, I got into Diablo Immortal, which was alright. It's okay. It was kind of fun, but I realized pretty quickly that it was very samey and kind of pointless. Kind of seemed like a big kind of waste of time, something to sink a bunch of hours and money into that you'll get these kind of diminishing returns from. I love the Diablo series, but this one kind of sucks. On VR, I played Aspire 2, which is a stealth game. I suck at stealth games, so I was really bad at this one, although if you're into the stealth genre, I'd imagine this could be a lot of fun for you. It's very immersive, really cool game, really great presentation, but just not for me. I also played Bone Lab, which is amazing. It did make me kind of queasy. I have to go through again and see if I can find some ways to tweak the optimization, because I'd like to replay it and play through with the mods and stuff, but it was difficult for me to play for any sort of significant amount of time. And lastly, on VR, I played through Resident Evil 4, and man, so good. Now, I may have said it already, but Resident Evil 4 is one of my favorite games of all time, and I have played it on every platform it's come out on, and have always had a good time with it. And I know this game front and back. I know everything about it, in terms of enemy placement, item placement, the maps. I've just been through it so many times that even though there's not really any surprises in it, I still have a great time with it because it's just so much fun. Playing it in VR was a totally fresh experience. They switched a few things up. I know they removed some of the more objectionable sexual content, which I don't really have an issue with. I don't have an issue with the content, and I don't have an issue with them removing it. I don't really feel too strongly about that. But man, it really felt like a fresh experience. They placed some items in places where you might not think to look if you were playing with the, traditional third-person camera. And overall, it's one of the smoothest, most well-made VR games that I've ever played. I think Bone Lab is a shining example of what VR can do, but Resident Evil 4 felt a bit more polished and a bit more accessible right off the bat. And I'm not a huge proponent of VR. I'm still kind of skeptical about its sort of, larger applications in society and in gaming, but as a fun way to play through a fun game, it's pretty cool, and Resident Evil 4 is probably one of the best games you can play in VR. Moving now to another category, these are games that I played or picked up and started, and I wanted to love it. I saw it, saw the trailers, saw some screenshots, was stoked for the game, and then once I got into it, I found out that it wasn't really for me, and I just couldn't jive with the game entirely. First on the list is Golden Light, which is a really, really sweet survival horror, roguelite, prop hunt game. It's really, really cool. Great presentation. So interesting, so creative, but ultimately I found it to be a little too frustrating and anxiety-inducing for me to spend a significant amount of time with. House Party is a game that I've seen a lot of Let's Play videos of. It's got the Doja Cat DLC. It's really funny, or at least it can be very funny, but in practice, it's a pretty clunky, awkward game. It feels almost broken at times, and it's not fun. It's just not fun. It's funny. It's funny to watch, but actually playing it is kind of a mess, in my opinion. Iron Lung is a short horror game from David Zemansky, the creator of Dusk. You're in a submarine and you have to take pictures of different points on the map, and you kind of, have your coordinates and you can move, and you're trying not to get knocked around by these sea creatures that you can't really see. It's very anxiety-inducing. It's a very fun little horror game, and I wanted to enjoy it more than I did. I did enjoy it, and I made a video on the game, but I did find myself being maybe a little too dumb for it. I had a lot of trouble with the map and with the coordinates and with the actual mechanics of the game, to the point where I just kind of couldn't really have a good time with it, even though I know it's a good game and it's got some cool ideas. Code Vein is a game that I spent over 40 hours in. I've made a video on Code Vein talking about sort of my impressions of the game and why I didn't stick with it, and I got some very thoughtful responses from a lot of Code Vein fans. And this is a game that I have actually gone back into, and I am completing it, and I am going to do a follow-up video. It's just that I wanted to love this game, and I couldn't. After hearing from more people who are really into the game and know more about it, I realized that I was kind of coming at it from the wrong angle, and so having a different perspective, I am finding new depths to the game that I wasn't totally aware of, kind of because the game's a little obtuse, and it kind of obscures certain aspects of the game. It's not great at communicating things to the player, especially in the opening tutorial. It's a little messy, but it's cool if you're into that kind of anime shit. Goat Simulator 3 is a game that Andrew and I streamed very recently, and it looked like a lot of fun, and I really was excited to get into it. I've played a bit of Goat Simulator 2, or Goat Simulator 1. There was no 2, that's the joke. This doesn't feel like an improvement on the first game at all. It seems like it's just kind of more of the same, and while that's fine, the joke kind of wore thin. I don't know, it's Goat Simulator, again. I mentioned earlier that I played the Resident Evil HD remake. It's the remaster of the remake that was on GameCube. It's the remake of the original PlayStation version of Resident Evil. I really wanted to love this game and ultimately just found it to be rather frustrating. It's a good game, good port, good remake. It seemed like there were certain choices in terms of the inventory management and the placement of things where the game was just kind of artificially lengthened and made harder just because I, couldn't carry one more item, which is something that wasn't an issue for me in almost any other Resident Evil game that I've played, and I've played pretty much the entire mainline series front to back. Yeah, just kind of a flawed experience. I think that all of the preceding games really built on what that game presented, and even though there's something in the tone and storytelling of the first game that I do think is lost throughout the rest of the series, in terms of being a fun game, it often felt like a chore. Brock the Investigator is a game that I covered recently on a roundup video. Point and click game that had a really nice presentation, but just ultimately didn't hook me. Orbital Bullet is a third-person roguelite action platformer with an interesting gimmick. The levels are all on a 360, so you kind of shoot and your bullets go all the way around like a carousel. Pretty interesting, but I found the upgrade system to be a bit too strenuous, and for the amount of time I was putting into it, I didn't feel like I was getting enough back, and I just kind of couldn't stick with the game. Ganryu 2 is a sequel to a Neo Geo game, I believe. It's an action platformer side-scroller in the classic sort of 16-bit, 32-bit maybe style, and it's a lot of fun, but overall, it felt like it was lacking something. Something about it, I just couldn't stick with the game all the way to the end. Hyperdemon is not necessarily a sequel, but it is a follow-up to Devil Daggers. And if you had a hard time with Devil Daggers, well, you'll have a much harder time with Hyperdemon, in my opinion. I think it's a really interesting game. I wanted to love it, but the deeper I got into it, the more I realized that it's just not for me. Earlier this year, I did a long-form video essay on all of the Clive Barker games, both released and unreleased, and two games that I was really stoked for were Undying and Jericho, and neither one was really a complete experience for me. Each one had some pretty massive drawbacks and flaws that really held me back from loving the games, and I really think it's a shame that we never got like a perfect Clive Barker game despite many attempts. Killing Floor 2 is a game that Andrew and Jordan were speaking highly of, although I think Jordan prefers Killing Floor 1. We played a couple rounds, and overall, I just thought it was janky and bad. I just thought it sucked. Sorry. Tried it. Wanted to love it. Looked like a lot of fun. Thought it'd be a fun little squad-based, experience. Or not necessarily a squad-based, but, the game you play with your friends. Multiplayer thing, and, not for me. Watch Dogs 2 is a game that I think I got for free through something, and it took forever to install. I had to install the Ubisoft launcher, and it went through all this shit, and it took forever to get going in the game, and then once I finally got going with it, it just felt incredibly underwhelming. It felt like every game I've ever played before in that sort of like open world, go here, do the thing, collect the little bits and bobs, go here, talk to the guy, do the fetch mission, talk to the guy, go here, climb the tower, and shit like that. It just seemed so repetitive, and given all I had to go through just to get the game up and running, man, I don't think I like these games. I know that company gets a bad rap for a lot of the practices they engage in and some of the ways they presented their games, and I can understand why. It's better on paper than it is in practice. Believe it or not, we are nearing the last few categories. I have a set of games that I think, I don't want to be mean and say they were bad games, but if I had to put them into the yes or no category, these games are straight up no's. For me, at least. This is just one person's opinion. So real quick, I'm just going to run down the list. We have Getsu Fumiden for the NES or the Famicom. Didn't like it. Felix the Reaper. I didn't like it. Contra Rogue Corps. Rogue Corps? I don't know. This game fucking sucks. Horrible. Horrible game. I don't want to be mean and say they were bad games, but fuck that game. Retro Ninja Cyber Assassin. Too obtuse. Too difficult. Too much. Come on. Tone it down a little bit, maybe. VCB Y City 4K. What was I expecting? Clock Knockers 2. I did a video on this game. I tried to be as constructive in my criticism as I could, but overall, I cannot recommend this one. eTora or iTora, couldn't ever figure out the actual pronunciation of this, despite reaching out to the devs several times. Pretty underwhelming platformer that has a really nice animation style and a nice look in general, but feels very undercooked. Only Fuck 2, Scarlet, man, a bunch of dumb, horny mini games. So you can see some pictures of a, computer-generated naked woman. Tony and Clyde. I did a review of this game. I got a comment back from the developers suggesting that I use the dodge when I'm getting shot at. The dodge was not the issue. The issue is that the game was full of bugs and runs terribly. And even though I normally love any sort of twin-stick third-person shooter, this game feels very much incomplete and broken. Pretty Girls Breakout Plus, it's Breakout with pretty girls. Unless you really love Breakout or, non-nude anime chicks being, drawn in cute outfits, avoid this one. Janitor Bleeds, a pretty nice-looking, nice PS1 style presentation, survival horror in the sort of like no combat, you gotta kind of run and hide and use environmental things type horror. But overall, performance was very rough on this game. It felt very buggy and unfinished. Even though it had a lot of cool ideas, the state the game was in when I played it, I couldn't recommend it to anyone. Rungor is a card battler roguelite in the style of Slay the Spire. Feels very derivative of Slay the Spire, with a couple unique twists, but it felt bad and confusing, and I didn't like it at all. And maybe I'm being dumb, maybe I just didn't get it, but it felt very undercooked. Adventures of Poppy is a NES-style platformer side-scroller that I put way too much time into and could not really make any sort of satisfying progress. Very samey, very frustrating, very simplistic. Feels almost like a tribute to some of the worst NES games ever made. Riddled Corpses EX. I don't even really remember playing this one. I know I played it. I mean, it's on my list. It didn't make an impact. Dungeon Master is a shitpost as a game, and I knew that it was going to be a piece of shit when I started it, but I was hoping it would be funny, and I don't know, maybe this type of humor just isn't for me. Tower Princess is a third-person action platformer roguelite, so it kind of combines two genres that I don't think I've ever seen combined, at least not successfully. This game is very awkward, very samey, feels unfinished, feels incomplete in so many ways. And as much as I wanted to like this one, I can't recommend it. It doesn't feel like it's a finished game. Monster Master is another game that we tried here on the channel a few times. We've had some communication with the devs, and I don't mean to be mean, but the game is busted, and it should not really even be in early access. I don't think it should be on Steam. I think the game should kind of be taken down until it's in a playable state, because it's pretty fucking broken most of the time. Why put out a game that's not done? It's so clearly not done. Natural is a puzzle game, like a jigsaw puzzle game, but it was missing some key features that I saw in the actual trailer for the game, and I covered this in my mini review I did of it, but not good. I mentioned earlier I did that Clive Barker video. For that, I also played a ton of Nightbreed games. There were 2 different games that had a total of maybe like 10 or 12 ports. Way too many Nightbreed games. None of them are good. They are all a chore. They all suck. Terrible games. All right, I don't mean to be mean, but I gotta speak my truth. Now, I do want to talk about the best games I played in 2022, but before I get to those, I have some honorable mentions. So these are not incredible must-play games in my opinion, but they're right on the cusp, and I would strongly recommend them if they sound like something that might be up your alley, with the caveat that maybe there's something about them that makes them, you know, not quite top-tier material, but not shit, you know? They're honorable mentions. BioCrisis, which I mentioned BioCrisis 2 earlier, and I mentioned the first game as well. It's a game that I had a lot of fun with, although that fun lasts maybe 15 minutes. You know, it's not meant for massive replay. It's kind of almost like a, you know, proof of concept for something larger, which is now turning out to be that BioCrisis sequel. BioCrisis sequel. However, the game is only $3, and for $3, it's pretty good, and if that money goes toward helping a developer who's making BioCrisis 2, which looks like it's going to be such a sweet game, I'd say go for it. Sable is a game that I was really excited for. It's clearly ripping off the art style of Mobius, you know, the French comic artist. It's good. It's a good game. I really liked it. But also, I got pretty sick of it pretty quickly. Now, the game does let you, once you complete a certain number of missions, you can end the game whenever you feel like your journey's complete. So once I had my fill, I went through and I completed the game, and I got my resolution to the story, and it felt like a nice, complete experience. So I'd say, you know, if it feels like, oh man, the game's overstaying its welcome, well, you can end it. Or if you find yourself really in love with the world, well, there's a lot to explore. This game has a really cool soundtrack by Japanese Breakfast, and it's got a really strong look. Well, it's obviously super derivative of, you know, the work of another artist. It's cool to see that style translated into a world that you can explore in a video game. The Tribulation Entanglement is a indie developed, I think, solo dev game. It's an action platformer, feels, you know, kind of similar to something like Super Metroid or even the first Metroid game in some ways. Not that it's necessarily a Metroidvania, at least not to my memory, but it feels like that in terms of like some of the level design and the way the combat feels. That said, I had a hard time getting through it all the way because it's got a couple like kind of obtuse areas where the combat's really difficult, and it's, I don't know. It's a little rough around the edges. However, it's got a really, really cool presentation, in my opinion, and some really strong ideas there. And I think that if you're into this style of gameplay, this type of platformer, it's a pretty unique and pretty awesome looking experience that I think is worth your time if you're into that style. Binary Domain is a game that I have very mixed feelings on. It's a sort of God of War clone developed by the studio that does the Yakuza games. So imagine this studio that does these very Japanese games trying to make an American game, an American action shooter, which the Yakuza games are not shooters. I don't think there's guns in any of those games. I mean, there's some gunplay in the cinematics, but that's mostly like a, you know, action brawler. It feels like a continuation of the kind of games you know, play like, you know, the combat in Shenmue, or even in something as far back as River City Ransom. You know, it's very much punch, kick, punch, kick. Whereas this is a straight up God of War clone. I think I liked it. I think it's worth playing. It's unique, it's interesting, but it also kind of grated on me a lot of the time. And I feel like it's a game that people probably either love or hate. And I haven't gone out of my way to find a lot of reviews of it, but yeah, it's got something. I just can't tell if that something it has is great or not. Chorus is a space combat, space exploration game where you're in a ship, a sentient ship that you have this sort of like mental link to, and there's a pretty complex story here and really fun combat. And I found myself having difficulty with some of the mechanics and, you know, some of the more advanced maneuvering of the ship. You gotta do these like little boosts and turns, and honestly, I just found myself, just with how my spatial awareness is in 3D spaces and stuff, like just personal issues I have with that made it hard for me to get deeper into the game because it became kind of difficult for me to control. Same where I used to have a lot of trouble with the all-terrain, mode. I think it was the all-terrain mode in Star Fox 64, where you have to, fight the bosses in the giant open plains. That kind of stuff has always been hard for me in games. I don't know why. My brain just kind of has an issue with that. But this game is really cool, and I wish I could have gotten deeper into it. It's just not a genre that I'm able to really excel in. Getsu Fumiden Undying Moon is a sort of reboot / sequel of the game Getsu Fumiden for the Famicom. I think it had an NES release. I'm not sure. I'm not sure if it was ever translated officially. But man, I really enjoyed this game. It's not incredible. It's very derivative. It's basically like Dead Cells, action roguelite, hack and slash, jumping around. But man, in terms of those kinds of games, it has everything I want. The collection of weapons and upgrades you can get, and the variety in the levels and enemies, and the overall fluidity of the movement and combat. It's all there. It gets points off because it's not really anything new. But if you like those kinds of games and, you run through one to completion, or at least to the point where you're sick of it or unable to progress, it's nice to have other games in the genre to go to and get a, similar but still slightly unique experience out of. And I think this is one of those games where if you like Dead Cells, if you like that kind of roguelite action, I think you could have a pretty good time with this. I was surprised at how much I enjoyed it. And the overall presentation and visual style is pretty unique. I've not seen any other action platformers that really utilize this look. Crossfire X is a multiplayer game that was released for the Xbox. It is a console exclusive game in the Crossfire series, which is one of the most popular PC multiplayer shooters in the world. It's not that popular in the United States, but internationally, huge hit. It runs on older computers, it runs on lower hardware, and it's super popular. Why you'd make a console exclusive multiplayer shooter, a little confusing to me, because I think that, those games are better on PC in general. Whatever. I think they're kind of shooting themselves in the foot there, and this game had a very rocky release, but the reason I played it was because it had a single-player campaign developed by Remedy Entertainment, who of course made Alan Wake, Control, Max Payne, Quantum Break, some of my favorite games of all time. It's a Call of Duty clone, straight up. It's straight up Call of Duty clone with bullet time, and with Remedy references and some information that can help influence your understanding of the Remedy connected universe. So if you're a Remedy fiend like I am, there's something to love about this. If you're not a fan of Remedy, though, it's just an average Call of Duty clone with some supernatural storytelling and some, interesting narrative elements that aren't present in the more straightforward sort of storytelling of a Call of Duty campaign. But yeah, flawed experience. I don't regret it. I had a lot of fun with it. Thought it was really cool. Pretty short game as well, which I appreciate a shorter campaign. Multiplayer is kind of a mess. Not really for me anyway. But again, I'd recommend it to any Remedy fans. Otherwise, might want to skip it. Drill Deal Oil Tycoon is a game that we received a review key for, and I reviewed it and checked it out. It's a simulation game, like a sim resource management game where you're running a oil rig, and I just had a really good time with it. There's light combat, there's like sharks and pirates and stuff you sometimes need to like shoot a cannon at, which is super simplistic, but it's fun, and it breaks up, the monotony of the resource management stuff in an interesting way. It's a super simple game, and I could see a lot of people kind of writing it off, but I had a surprisingly good time with it. I don't play a ton of games like this, and I know there are better games in that genre, but I was just surprised at how much I enjoyed it, and I would recommend it. Hellraiser 64 is in the style of 90s console shooters like Duke Nukem 3D or Doom 64. It's an indie dev, solo dev. I reviewed the game on Steam negatively, and then over time came to reverse that opinion. The developer's been working on the game a lot. There's been some great updates to it. And overall, it's still a flawed experience. It still needs maybe a few more eyes on it and a few more people to run through and kind of give feedback, I think. But that said, man, it's got style. It is dripping with style. Cool enemy designs, cool levels, music rips. It's a lot of fun. It's very creative. There's so many good ideas on display here. It's a little underdeveloped in some ways, which I think could keep it from being, something I would wholeheartedly recommend to everyone. But if you're able to kind of roll with the punches, especially if you're a fan of like indie dev, solo dev games, man, there's some really cool ideas here. It's very badass. It's a lot of fun. The Imaginary Circle is a really short point-and-click adventure, kind of mystery game. We are going through an abandoned prison. I don't want to spoil anything, but man, I really enjoyed this game. There's opportunities for multiple endings. It's not super difficult. It's not super complex. It's a moderate challenge with some really interesting philosophical ideas and questions that it asks. It gives you a lot to chew on, and it has a really nice, clean, unique visual style that I really found very attractive. Nachkriegsgraten. I don't know how to say this. It's a German word. A punk rock band, made their own puzzle game. So you do, digital jigsaw puzzles while listening to their tracks from a recent album of theirs. I could see people being like, what the fuck? I don't care about that shit. But I like to do an online or digital jigsaw puzzle every now and then. It's not the same experience as a real jigsaw puzzle in person, but there is something kind of calming and zen about it, and it was also cool to find out about a new band that I think is pretty good. Dead Estate is a game that I played just before making this video. It's a roguelite, third-person shooter, overhead isometric view, very close quarters combat. It's got this kind of cutesy, crossy road, almost kind of graphic style. Obviously, there's a heavy influence from Resident Evil, Dead Estate, Resident Evil. It's not really breaking any new ground. It's similar to a lot of other things I've played. I just had a really good time with it. It controls really well. I like the visual presentation. I like the enemies. I like the power-ups. I like chaining together different charms. I don't know what they're called in this game, but you get different modifiers and weapons, and I just had a really good time with it. It's a simple little game, but I think it's got a lot of opportunities for fun gameplay, which is kind of what draws me to those roguelike games. It's like, can I build this like unique character for this run that isn't like anything else I've played before and might not ever play again, depending on, how randomized and how rare some of the occurrences are. It has a lot of opportunities for those really fun runs, so I'd recommend this one. Lastly, want to mention Dumpy and Bumpy, which is a throwback to some old school NES puzzle platformer type games. It's straight up in that NES mold. You'll definitely recognize the gameplay from other titles. It's not really breaking new ground, but it is really fun, solid presentation, very easy to play, and I think it's available on Switch. It's a great mobile game. It's simple, but if you like this kind of stuff, it's obviously an A+ for that style. I could see not everyone being into that, but man, it's really nailing what it attempts to do. So those were my honorable mentions. They're games that I think are good or worth checking out, with a caveat a lot of the time. However, there are other games that I would say there's no caveat. These are great games, and you're a fake gamer if you don't like these games. If you don't play these, they're not your favorite, you might as well stop gaming. Okay, I'm being facetious here, but I do think these are great games. These are the best games that I played in 2022. I would highly recommend these to anyone who loves video games. So let's get into it. Death Stranding is a game that I played on my PS4, and I played it on a lower difficulty level because I was really having trouble with the combat and the stealth stuff. I suck at stealth. But even though I'm playing it on easy mode, I can't believe how much fun I had with this game. There is so much on offer here. It's such a huge world with so many nuances to the exploration and the mechanics. I mean, essentially you're a package delivery person. There's a lot more to it that I'm not going to get into, but what really drew me to the game, in addition to the storytelling, and I'm a big Kojima fan and all that stuff, I really, really just love the experience of walking around this world and the challenge of traversing different terrain and heights and challenges. It's just so hard to explain how much this game rules until you play it, because even when I first saw it, I was like, I don't know if I'm going to like that. It looks kind of hard. It looks kind of obtuse. It looks kind of bland. But man, if you have ever just enjoyed a game like, Skyrim or Fallout, and just, where you're walking around and you're just going through the wasteland and exploring, this scratches a similar itch, but with the caveat that, you're a delivery person. So you've got the supplies on your back and you have the baby you have to take care of. There's so much here. And I'm probably one day going to talk about this game in depth, but man, don't snooze on this one. I know it's been out for years. The definitive edition or the director's cut came out, I think, in 2022. It's on PC now. It's more available than it's ever been. Play this game. It's so good. Loop Hero is a game that Andrew covered on the channel, I think last year when it was still in early access or when a demo dropped. But basically, this is an idle sort of battler where your character goes around a loop, and as you battle enemies, it's an auto battler. You don't really do anything, but you're placing tiles on the map that interact with your character. So you'll put enemies down, and they'll battle those enemies and get resources and weapons and gear from the enemies, and you see how many times you can go through the loop, and then when you go through X number of times, a boss appears. I've never played anything like this. It's an incredible concept. It's very kind of tactical. You got to really think out the plans, and as you go through the game, it gets more and more complex, but it really gives a lot back to the player, and there's so much depth here. I've really never seen anything quite like this, and I think it's really a 10 out of 10. Mortal Kombat 11 continues the tradition of being awesome. The Mortal Kombat 9, 10 games were so good. I think they're a great way to reboot the series, and they have just gotten better and better every time. I'm not great at fighters, and I also don't play them competitively, but the Mortal Kombat games, between the stories and the crypt and all of the different side characters and DLC characters you can get, these games are just a blast. Playing through the story mode in Mortal Kombat 11 is like watching a Mortal Kombat movie that we never got. It is like just over-the-top badass action. It's very dumb, it's very boneheaded. If you don't like big, dumb, violent action movie shit, you're not gonna like it. You wouldn't like Mortal Kombat to begin with. But man, if you've ever been a fan of this genre, of these games, they have gotten better and better and better. It's crazy that they could even iterate on, like, Ultimate Mortal Kombat 3, my favorite. They really found a way to maintain what was so great about the, traditional 2D fighter and expand on it in ways that I never thought possible. I can't believe how much fun these games are, and they're always on sale, it seems. So please, play Mortal Kombat 11. And play 10 and 9 as well, but man, it is so good. I can't believe how good it is. Way better than the Injustice games, if you've played those. It's similar, but leagues apart. Androdunos 2 is a sequel to a relatively, I don't want to say obscure, but not a super beloved side-scrolling shoot-'em-up game from the 90s. I think it was a Neo Geo game. Wow. I mean, that game is really all right. It's an okay game. The sequel is a solid 10 out of 10 in terms of old school shoot 'em ups. It is so much fun. It has everything you'd want from one of those games, like the design of the enemies and the levels and the combat and the pacing of it is just perfect. It's an aged genre. I know it's not the most cutting edge thing anymore, and the day of the shoot 'em up and the side scrolling or vertical shooters is long past. I get that. But man, this perfectly distills what was so much fun about the mid 90s, I'd say, of that genre. If you like shmups, you cannot go wrong with this. So good. And if you're not into the genre, you've been curious about it, man, what a great place to start. Cuties Hacked, Oh No, Someone Stole My Photos is a game that I reviewed for the channel recently. It's a horny anime girl game based on Zonix, which is a old computer game, which has been done in different ways over the years, and I can't believe this was such a great game, in my opinion. I'm admittedly not into the hentai stuff. It just doesn't do it for me, but hey, no shame if that's what you're into. But man, the gameplay was so much fun. I got this game and I thought I'd review it kind of as a gag and wound up playing through the whole thing in one sitting. And there's new DLC episodes that I think I'm actually going to pick up because I want more of this gameplay. Wasteland 3 is the sequel to Wasteland 2, which is a sequel to Wasteland, and they kind of rebooted the series decades later with these like squad-based, turn-based RPGs, which are a sort of, fork in the road. You have Fallout and Wasteland. Those series are very interconnected and intertwined in a lot of ways that I'm not going to get into here, but if you like Fallout, but you want a slightly different experience, you like the Wasteland, but you want maybe turn-based combat or a deeper immersion in terms of the RPG, storytelling and decision making, it's there in Wasteland 3. It is by far one of the best games I've ever played. I think it's a 10 out of 10 RPG for sure. And man, it's got replay value, it's got challenge, it's fun, it's funny, it's very brutal, it's very dark. It's unforgiving as the Wasteland would be, but it finds a way to add a certain irreverence when it's necessary. And I can't say enough, this game rules. So good. Scorn is a game that I recently made a hour-long video on, so I don't really want to say much more about it here, but the game made my best of 2022 list and is one of the better games I've ever played. It's obviously aping the style of some very prolific artists, and it's not, wholly original in its visual presentation, but in terms of what it does with the atmosphere and the storytelling and the overall experience is unparalleled. I think it's a great game. Maybe not for everyone, but it's worth trying. WWE 2K22 was a return to the arcade-style wrestling of the, N64 games, No Mercy, WrestleMania 2000, and there were some games after that too, but for a long time the 2K series was more in the simulation kind of technical style, and eventually those games got to the point where they were so bad they took a year off and kind of restarted the series with 2K22 in a completely different style. And for me, this is one of the best wrestling games I've ever played. I really did not connect with that simulation style. It was too technical for me. It just wasn't fun. I really want to just be able to drop in for 15-20 minutes, play a couple matches, see some wrestlers that I was a fan of when I was younger, or see some fun creative characters and just kind of, have a quick fun match or two. Maybe play through the career mode or something, but I'm just looking to have fun. And for me, this is one of the most fun games I've ever played. It totally takes everything I enjoyed about those old N64 era games, which I think are the kind of pinnacle of wrestling video games, and puts it in a modern scenario. And I can't say enough, man, if you like those old school wrestling games like No Mercy and WrestleMania 2000 and everything else in that vein, WCW, NWO Revenge, you're gonna like this a lot. Ninja Turtles Shredder's Revenge, another throwback to an old genre, but done so well. This is a classic side-scrolling beat 'em up. You can play it single player, you can play it couch co-op, you can play online co-op. People can drop in. Strangers can drop in if you want to play like a full 4-player, 5-player, I think even. Andrew and Jordan and I played this on stream. We went through the whole game over a couple nights. I mean, there's not much to say, really. It's a side-scrolling beat-em-up in the Turtles in Time style. This game has a lot of references to the cartoon. It's set in the, late 80s, early 90s Ninja Turtles cartoon universe. So there's a lot of characters from there that I don't know if have been brought into future iterations of the characters, and especially the more recent Nickelodeon series, which I'm honestly not familiar with at all. But man, it captures everything that's fun about those old school beat 'em ups and adds a couple new twists that make the game feel fresh, even though it's a genre that is way past its expiration date. So man, if you ever enjoyed those old school beat 'em ups, this one really nails it. The Fridge is Red is a first-person, puzzle-based horror game where you go through different environments and figure out how to, get through to the end of the little story. There's several vignettes. It's in a sort of, maybe PS1 graphic style. I just found this game to be really exciting in terms of the visuals, the overall sort of nightmare-like quality of everything, but also the puzzle solving was a lot of fun, and I don't play a ton of games like this, so I was surprised that I was so into it, but it's a relatively obscure title. I didn't see a ton of coverage on it. I know there's certain channels that always cover horror games like this, but in terms of, more general interest channels and reviewers, I didn't really see any activity, so I would say this game is worth checking out, and I do believe there's a demo for it if you're not sold. For a recent episode of Yeah, I've Played, Andrew, Jordan, and I all played through the first Call of Duty campaign, and I personally have never played through a Call of Duty game. I played a bit of multiplayer once or twice at someone's house on console, I think, and I played maybe 20 minutes of Modern Warfare, I think the Modern Warfare remake, but I had never actually played a Call of Duty campaign, and we wanted to go all the way back to the beginning and see how it holds up, and man, it really holds up. It's a wonderful first-person shooter, great level design, great variation between the levels. Every single part was memorable. There was always something in each level that made it like, oh yeah, that's that mission. That's that mission. And even though there were a few points where it was it felt dated, it felt needlessly difficult sometimes for the wrong reasons, those moments are few and far between and really don't take away from how strong the rest of the game is. I can't believe how good a game that's some 22 years old, I think, how well it holds up today as an FPS, and just in general, the storytelling, the visuals, it's all really, really good still. Yakuza Like a Dragon was the first game in the Yakuza series to switch to turn-based combat, and I became a huge fan of Yakuza after playing Yakuza 0. I'm definitely not alone in that experience. I know that game really opened up the series to a lot of new fans, and I was a little bit skeptical about a turn-based Yakuza game, but wow, it's so good. Maybe the best one I've ever played? Hard to say. 0 is also really, really great, really charming, and as the first one I've played, it definitely has a certain place in my mind. But Like a Dragon is so good. I know a lot of people are skeptical about turn-based games. This has some things like auto battle, I think, and there's a lot of variation in the class system. You can have different roles and abilities and loadouts for your characters that can really vary how the combat feels. And like a Yakuza game, there's a lot of side missions, there's a lot of world to explore, a lot of really deep, powerful storytelling. Maybe the game of the year for me. Maybe, maybe the best game I played all year. I think it was. But I don't want to say, for sure. Not trying to rank these. But if I had to, it's number 1 or 2 for sure. Nightmare Reaper is a first-person FPS, kind of looter, shooter, boomer shooter. You have insane loadouts in this game. This game can get so wild. It is really not like anything I've ever played before, even though it takes cues from a lot of other games, even some unexpected influences like Pokemon or Dangerous Dave and games like that, Nightmare Reaper is a game that really thrives on the player finding all sorts of combinations of weapons and modifiers and, you know, creating a loadout for their character that can just do, you know, insane damage. And then you're going to not just feel overpowered to the point where, you know, you progress and you're just so powerful that the game becomes, you know, too easy and it gets a little boring. You know, the game is challenging enough and has enough variation in the level design, the enemies, and everything else that it keeps up with you. It definitely finds ways to, even when you think like, you know, you're this unstoppable god, it can still throw things at you that make you still have to stay on your feet, and you can't just kind of rest on your insane loadout. Man, Nightmare Reaper is so good. Beyond Crimson Stars is another game that I did a long-form video essay on, so I don't want to say too much other than it's a sort of narrative first-person experience where you're exploring the sort of fractured mind of your dead father. You bring his brain to a kiosk in the mall, and you explore his memories. And man, it's a very powerful game. I did an interview with the developer that's there in the video, and you can find it, you know, in the link below. Postal Brain Damaged is another game that I did a video on that I reviewed the game when it was still in early access. There was a demo, but the game finally launched, and my opinion of the game did a full 180. I was not sold on this title, and then when I actually played the full version of the game, it became one of the best shooters I played all year. Man, it's so good. It's by far the best Postal game. It doesn't really have a ton of the Postal humor. At least it doesn't have a ton of the most deplorable parts of Postal humor. You know, there's some questionable stuff in Postal 2 where I could see it being the kind of game that well, definitely wouldn't get made today, and they definitely toned down some of those things for Postal 4. I'm getting off track. If you were turned off by some of the more distasteful things in the Postal series, I think you could still really enjoy this game. Everything about it feels really good. There's huge levels to explore. There's a really fun variation in weapons and enemies, and it's just enormous. It's a huge game. It feels so good to go through each level and explore and find all the secrets. It's in that old school sort of key hunting, you know, the big maps, and, you know, it's super old school boomer shooter kind of stuff, but made with modern sensibilities that don't leave you feeling all frustrated like something like Hexen or Heretic might have when you were looking around these big obtuse maps trying to find out where to go, and it could maybe just get stuck. This game gives you a similar experience without the frustration, if that makes sense. 2022 was the first year I really got into the Silent Hill games. For some reason, I've always put them off, partly because I never had a PlayStation, I never had any, you know, Sony consoles. I did have a used PS2 for a couple years not too long ago, but I never found any hard copies of the Silent Hill games, so I just never got to play them. Recently, through emulation, myself and the rest of the guys on the channel played through Silent Hill 1 for a Yeah I've Played episode, and for an upcoming Yeah I've Played episode, I recently played through Silent Hill 2 on PC using the Enhanced Edition mod. And I can definitely see why this is a 10 out of 10 game for so many people, why it's such a beloved title, and why so many people are excited but skeptical about the upcoming remake. So we're going to get into this game in depth in our upcoming episode of Yeah I've Played, but for now, wow, can't believe I put off this series for that long. These games are really good, and I can't wait to check out Silent Hill 3 and 4, and the rest of the games in the series, even though I know that they become more and more, contentious as time goes on. Certain titles people think are terrible, certain ones that people think are terrible, some people still love. I've seen strong cases for and against every game after Silent Hill 2. So I'm going to judge for myself, but I'm really excited to dive into the rest of the series. Nightmare of Decay is a first-person survival horror game that is a tribute to games like Amnesia, Alone in the Dark, Resident Evil, Silent Hill, all the big ones. There's references here, there's puzzles taken directly from those games. The game is very tongue-in-cheek. It's not really meant to be taken too seriously, but I believe it's only $5 on Steam. It's pretty short, but it's challenging and exciting if you're into the survival horror genre, especially the classics in the genre. It's very irreverent. There's a lot of callbacks, there's a lot of references, but it doesn't feel like too much. And it still holds its own as an exciting game. And it's nice to play one of those old school survival horror games in a first-person view, which I don't think really happened much. There was Amnesia, which was first-person, but there's no combat. And then we got the first-person survival horror games with Resident Evil, but that was generations later. Sticking with the survival horror theme, I also played through Eternal Darkness on the GameCube through emulation. And wow, I can't believe how well this game holds up. It was a game I started all the way back in the mid-2000s when it first came out, and it really feels like something made more toward the end of the GameCube era. It feels surprisingly modern, even though it has a couple things that definitely let you know it's an older game, and it's got some minor flaws, and it's way longer than I expected it to be. But despite those things, it is really good. It's really unique in its storytelling and its presentation. It famously has a lot of things that attempt to mess with the player and trick you. As you encounter more monsters, your sanity meter goes down, and that sanity meter can cause, all sorts of hallucinations in the game that some of them your character will see and some will affect you, the player. And well, a lot of games have done this since then. This is one of the first games that I remember ever doing this, and one of the first to do it so well. Nitro Kid is another game in the Slay the Spire type mold. It's a card-based roguelite, and again, this game really isn't breaking any new ground, but I had a blast with it. I think it's super playable. There's different loadouts for the different player characters, and each one presents a unique challenge that puts a, unique twist on that formula. And again, these games are very genre-based. They kind of stick to the same set of rules. You know what to expect, but when they do their thing right, it kind of forgives it for being kind of samey. Does that make sense? Another roguelike game I played a lot of, which still isn't really breaking any new ground per se, is Loopmancer. It's a roguelite action platformer. You can shoot, you got different, abilities like a blast from your palm or grenades and rockets, and there's melee attacks, which are your primary weapon because ammo's finite and you can't just go through shooting every enemy in a level. You gotta rely more heavily on melee. But the game is really interesting, and it came out, it was kind of bogged down with technical issues and bugs, but since the first iteration I played, the game has really been vastly improved, and they've really listened to player feedback to craft a much stronger experience. And again, well, this game is really doing exactly what you expect the genre to do. It's bringing some really fun, unique things to the table. There's multiple endings. You're a detective who keeps waking up in the same day, and every time you wake up, you know a little bit more about your case, you know a little bit more about how to reach the end of the story with a satisfying conclusion. And I believe there's 7 endings in total you can achieve. So there's multiple paths, there's a lot of different weapons to unlock, a lot of different play styles you can kind of mess with. This game has so much polish and so much care put into it that it's a little janky still, but it's less janky every day, and it's really, really fun. Quantic is another throwback FPS game that is a solo dev game, I believe solo from the ground up. The animations, the character design, level design, the sound and score, all by one person, and it's published by 3D Realms, the legendary publisher. I just finished this one last night. It is incredible. This is just the first episode of the game. I believe there is another episode in development, but it's going to take some time. The first episode gives you 10 levels, which includes a end boss fight. And man, this game rules. It's definitely taking cues from games like Blood, and thematically and stylistically a little bit from Resident Evil 4 with I don't want to get into it, with some of the story elements and some of the characters, but this is a really, really, really strong shooter. It's, I struggle with boomer shooter because I think for a while that kind of represented games like Dusk. And Dusk is a game that I also played for the first time this year, and I think it's a solid 9 out of 10, maybe even 10 out of 10 shooter. But as people have revisited this old school FPS genre, they've found ways to kind of iterate on the genre and add unique twists, whether it's visually or with certain game mechanics or level design or enemies and the enemy AI, just to make each one feel like more than just a throwback to something that had already been here in the past. Quantic especially, and Dusk, I'm going to mention Dusk as being really good, but I think enough's been said about Dusk over the years. Quantic is just incredible in its storytelling, in its visual presentation, and its level design. The combat is so much fun. I can't say enough about this game. You've got to play it. There's a free demo, so just get on it. Squad 51 vs. the Flying Saucers is a game that, for me, seemingly came out of nowhere, and I didn't expect it to be as good as it is, but man, it's another shmup like Androdunos 2 that I think is a solid 9, maybe 9.5 out of 10. Wow. So this is a classic shmup with a unique twist. It's presented like an old school black and white sci-fi movie or serial. So there's live action sci-fi stuff going on as, interstitials between levels. And then the transition into the gameplay is, nearly flawless, similar to how Cuphead really nailed the look of those old, Fleischer cartoons. This really nails the look of those old serials. And there's RPG elements to it. You have different ways to level up and change your loadout. So you can, if you go through a certain part a bunch of times and you keep dying, well, you're still racking up experience and you're going to make it easier for you as you go on. So it's the kind of game where, even though it's super difficult and punishing in some areas, even when you fail, you feel progress, which I think is a really great way to handle some of these older genres which have been tread so many times. I mean, side-scrolling shoot-'em-ups are one of the oldest types of games ever, the roots of that shmup genre. The game is only $20. It's got a lot of that same sort of kitsch and humor you'd see in older FMV-based games that I'm a big fan of. I really, really, really can't recommend this one enough, especially to anyone who's a fan of those old 50s sci-fi serials or the shmup genre in general. Sifu was a game that I had my eye on for a really long time, and thankfully when it finally launched, it totally lived up to the hype for me. A few of the complaints I had about the game that kept it from being like a perfect game for me were addressed in updates to the game. They've added a lot of free content to this game, a lot of quality of life content and updates, and overall, wow, this game is so good. It's extremely difficult, I would say, personally. I think it's a really demanding game, and I could see it being a turnoff for some players because it is the kind of game where you're going to go through the same level potentially dozens of times before you nail it. But the appeal of the game, somewhat similar to something like Angerfoot, is knowing where the enemies are, getting the jump on that, and playing it as, efficiently and strongly and quickly as possible to get through and really nail these levels and progress through to the next thing. Because every time you figure those out, it gives you that much more of an advantage for the next one. And the storytelling is really fun. There's a mystery you're solving. It's really not like anything else I've ever played in terms of the combat. The combat feels very real, very fluid, very heavy with the weighting of every kick and punch. You really feel like everything matters, and it's a real life or death situation in every encounter. It's a really good game. Nyx Umbra is a game that is really unique. I've never really seen or played anything quite like it. If I had to make a comparison, it is somewhat similar to something like Hyperdemon or Devil Daggers, especially in terms of the unique visual presentation and the way that a round or a playthrough of the game might last 30 seconds, a minute at most. But even giving that comparison, I'm not doing the game itself justice. It's a game where you are alone in a dark forest, you have a flaming sword to light your path, and you just kind of go through and see how far you can get. And there is another layer of complexity there. There's these gems you can find, and you're filling this meter up, and I haven't played through enough to figure out what that leads to. But the atmosphere and sound design in this game is incredible. Just being alone in a magical forest where everything wants to kill you is the vibe of this game, and if that sounds at all exciting, you've got to check this one out. The dev recently released another game called Intraquartz, which I haven't gotten around to playing yet, but it looks really good and I'm excited to try it. Stray is the cat game that so many people loved in 2022. I really love this game as well, and while I don't think it's the best game I've ever played, it's really charming, it's a great adventure game, really, really fun, and it's pretty short, which is always a plus in my book. I don't think this game is Game of the Year material like it is for a lot of people. I think the protagonist being a cute cat is probably getting it a lot of extra points with people, but there's a lot of hype, and it's for a reason. I mentioned that Resident Evil 4 is one of my favorite games of all time, and a big part of that game, and most of the other Resident Evil games, for me, is the inventory management. And someone went through and made a game called Save Room, which is essentially Resident Evil inventory management as a game. You're given X number of objects that you then need to fit inside of your case, and sometimes you need to do some things like combine herbs or reload weapons to figure out how to get everything in there. There's a lot of, twisting and rotating of guns and first aid sprays and things like that, but if you like the inventory management in the Resident Evil games, which I know a lot of you do, you're gonna want to play Save Room. It's not that long, but it's surprisingly in-depth for how simple the concept is. It really nails that zen feeling of organizing your case in a Resident Evil game. Turbo Overkill is a game that's currently in early access. It's being published by the legendary publisher Apogee, and wow, this is a really, really great shooter. Again, it's in the boomer shooter sort of mold. It's definitely got more old school influences to it. That said, the combat, presentation, movement, the enemy design, the overall presentation of everything and the way it feels is really, really good. This game has a free demo, and I think playing it is probably going to do more than me talking about it. But there's, again, a lot of hype around this game, and it's for good reason. This game rules, and if you're not sold, just play the demo. It's free, it's worth your time. My god, it's so much fun. The last game on the list is, again, probably top 1 or 2 contender for my best game I played, at least most fun, most enjoyable experience I had the whole year, Cult of the Lamb. This was a game I played the demo and did a quick review on the demo, I believe over the summer, but I finally got my hands on the full product, and wow, this game is so much fun. It combines settlement building and resource management with roguelite action in a sort of like a Binding of Isaac kind of style, but it's not a shooter, although you do have the ability to shoot to a limited capacity. It's more melee based. There's a story. It's not one of those play forever roguelike games. There is a start, middle, and an end. There's a narrative, and it's not the kind of game where you're gonna sink like 900 hours in. I'd say it's maybe a 30-35 hour game at most, but it's so good. It's just so good. It feels great to play. The controls are so smooth. The combat is so fluid and responsive. The different loadouts you can get for different weapons are always fun. I never have a run where I feel like, ugh, I have this weapon that sucks, Like, every time I have a loadout, it's fun and interesting and balanced in such a way where you never really feel like you're at a disadvantage or are gonna have less fun because you have like a shitty weapon loadout, which is something that can happen in a game like Binding of Isaac, where sometimes you fuck yourself and you go, ugh, I could play through the run with these terrible weapons just to try, but I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of people were prone to kind of bailing out and re-rolling, and that's not really a concern in this game. And in terms of the, resource management, settlement building kind of other aspect of the game, it's not so complex. It's not so hardcore, that you are going to be stressing out about managing your resources, but it's just enough that it's fun to kind of, balance all the plates and keep everything in working order. And on top of that, there's sort of a Animal Crossing type element to it with, relationships to your villagers or your cult members, really. There's a mini fishing game. There's different NPCs that give you little quests and you explore different areas and bring them back the resources that they desire. And there's so many things to find and unlock, and there's a lot of different choices you can make in the game, which it gives it a degree of replayability because different choices are going to give you different advantages or disadvantages in different ways. It's a really, really powerful experience, and one of the things that I think has going for it that might also be a knock against it for some people is that it's not an especially difficult game in any aspect. It's not so easy that it's just a thing you can breeze through with your eyes closed, but it's very playable. It's challenging but playable. It's very fun. The whole thing is really fun in this way that kind of blends, more hardcore gaming, like, I'd say Binding of Isaac can be a very hardcore game, with a more casual thing like Animal Crossing. It finds a way to really create this really pleasant middle ground that is just so much fun. I don't know if I have a better word for it than it's a fun game, and ultimately, I think that's what I'm looking for in most games, is just to have fun, and this game has it in spades. So, over 100 games this year. Were any of them any good? Well, by my metric here, about a third of them were amazing. And then, various degrees of good to awful beyond that point. I know this is kind of like a really over-the-top and kind of unnecessary way to handle a end-of-the-year best-of list, but I had been making this log and I wanted to talk about it in some kind of way, and so here it is. I'm curious to know, what games did you play this year that you think were really great? What were some of your honorable mentions? And what games were, total stinkers that you tried and just couldn't get down with? I'm curious to know, so please meet me down in the comments. Let me know what you think. I'd love to hear some more suggestions for games I can check out next year. And if you want to support Hidden Machine, well, please give this video a like, subscribe, and if you want to go further, there's a Patreon as well. Until next time, see ya.